Happening to meet Sir Adam Ferguson, I presented him to Dr. Johnson. Sir Adam expressed some apprehension that the Pantheon would encourage luxury. So it must be a new thing coming up. Sir, said Johnson, I am a great friend to public amusements, for they keep people from vice. You now, addressing himself to me, Boswell, would have been with a wench had you not been here. Oh, I forget you were married. Sir Adam suggested that luxury corrupts a people and destroys the spirit of liberty. Johnson said, Sir, that is all visionary. I would not give half a guinea to live under one form of government rather than another. It is of no moment to the happiness of an individual. Sir, the danger of the abuse of power is nothing to a private man. What Frenchman is prevented from passing his life as he pleases? Sir Adam said, But, sir, in the British Constitution it is surely of importance to keep up a spirit in the people so as to preserve a balance against the crown. Johnson said, Sir, I perceive you are a vile Whig. Why all this childish jealousy of the power of the crown? The crown has not power enough. When I say that all governments are alike, I consider that in no government power can be abused long. Mankind will not bear it. If a sovereign oppresses his people to a great degree, they will raise and cut off his head. There is a remedy in human nature against tyranny that will keep us safe under every form of government. Had not the people of France thought themselves honored as sharing in the brilliant actions of Louis XIV, they would not have endured him. And we may say the same of the King of Prussia's people. Little pre-French Revolution stuff going on there, huh? Sir Adam introduced the ancient Greeks and Romans. Johnson said, Sir, the mass of both of them were barbarians. The mass of every people must be barbarous where there is no printing, and consequently knowledge is not generally diffused. Knowledge is diffused among our people by the newspapers. Sir Adam mentioned the orators, poets, and artists of Greece. Johnson said, Sir, I am not talking of the mass. I am talking of the mass of the people. We see even when the boasted Athenians were. The little effect which Demosthenes' orations had upon them shows that they were barbarians. Sir Adam was unlucky in his topics, for he suggested a doubt of the propriety of bishops having seats in the House of Lords. Johnson said, How so, sir? Who is more proper for having the dignity of a peer than a bishop, provided a bishop be what he ought to be? And if improper bishops be made, that is not the fault of the bishops, but of those who make them. Alrighty. On Sunday, April 5th, after attending divine services at St. Paul's Church, I found him alone. Of a schoolmaster, later footnote tells us this is James Elphinston, of a schoolmaster of his acquaintance, a native of Scotland, Johnson said, He has a great deal of good about him, but he is also very defective in some respects. His inner part is good, but the outer part is mighty awkward. You in Scotland do not attain the nice critical skills in languages which we get in our schools in England. I would not put a boy to him whom I intended for a man of learning. But for the sons of citizens who are to learn a little, get a good morals, and then go to trade, he may do very well. I mentioned a cause in which I had appeared as counsel at the bar of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland, where a probationer, later footnote tells us this is Williams McMaster, from a book called Boswell's Fee Book. It's an interesting title. Anyway, as one licensed to preach but not yet ordained is called, a probationer, was opposed to, in his application to be inducted because it was alleged that he had been guilty of fornication 5 years before. Johnson said, Why, sir, if he had repented, it is not a sufficient objection. A man who is good enough to go to heaven is good enough to be a clergyman. This was a humane and liberal sentiment. But the character of a clergyman is more sacred than that of an ordinary Christian. As he is to instruct with authority, he should be regarded with reverence, as one upon whom divine truth has had the effects to set him above such transgressions as men less exalted by spiritual habits, and yet, upon the whole, not to be excluded from heaven, have been betrayed into the predominance of passion. That clergymen may be considered as sinners in general, as all men are, cannot be denied, but this reflection will not counteract their good precepts so much as the absolute knowledge of their having been guilty of certain specific immoral acts. I told him that by the rules of the Church of Scotland and their Book of Discipline, if a scandal, as it is called, is not persecuted for 5 years, it cannot afterwards be proceeded upon, unless it be of a heinous nature or again becomes flagrant. And that hence a question arose whether fornication was a sin of a heinous nature, and that I had maintained that it did not deserve that epithet, inasmuch as it was not one of those sins which argue very great depravity of heart. In short, was not in the general acception of mankind a heinous sin. Or heinous. Heinous, whatever. Johnson said, "No, sir, it is not a heinous sin. A heinous sin is that for which a man is punished with death or banishment." I said, "But, sir, after I had argued that it was not a heinous sin, an old clergyman rose up and, repeating the text of Scripture denouncing judgment against whoremongers, asked whether, considering this, there could be any doubt of fornication being a heinous sin." Johnson said, "Why, sir, observe the word whoremonger. Every sin, if persisted in, will become heinous. Whoremonger is a dealer of whores, as ironmonger is a dealer of iron. But as you don't call a man an ironmonger for buying and selling a penknife, so you don't call a man a whoremonger for getting one wench with child." It must not be presumed that Dr. Johnson meant to give any countenance to licentiousness, though in the character of an advocate he made a just and subtle distinction between occasional and habitual transgression. I spoke of the inequality of the living of the clergy in England and the scanty provisions some of the curates. Johnson said, "Why, yes, sir, but it cannot be helped. You must consider that the reverence of the clergy are not at the disposal of the state, like the pay of the army. Different men have founded different churches, and some are better endowed, some worse. The state cannot interfere and make an equal division of what has been particularly appropriated. Now, when a clergyman has but a small living, or even 2 small livings, he can afford very little to a curate." He said he went more frequently to church when there were prayers only, that when there was also a sermon, as the people required more example for the one than the other, it being much easier for them to hear a sermon than to fix their minds on prayer. Fair enough. Kind of feel the same way. What am I doing? On Monday, April 6th, I dined with him at Sir Alexander MacDonald's, where was a young officer in the regimentals of the Scot Royal, who talked with a vivacity, fluency, and precision so uncommon that he attracted particular attention. He proved to be the Honourable Thomas Erskine, a youngest brother to the Earl of Buchan, who had since risen into such brilliant reputation at the bar in Westminster Hall. Fielding being mentioned, Johnson exclaimed, "He was a blockhead." And upon my expressing my astonishment at so strange an assertion, he said, What I mean by his being a blockhead is that he was a barren rascal. I said, will you not allow, sir, that he draws very natural pictures of human life? Johnson said, why, sir, it is a very low life. Richardson used to say that had he not known who Fielding was, he should have believed he was an ostler. Sir, there is more knowledge of the heart in one letter of Richardson's than in all Tom Jones. I indeed never read Joseph Andrews. Erskine said, surely, sir, Richardson is very tedious. Johnson said, why, sir, if you were to read Richardson for the story, your impatience would be so much fretted that you would hang yourself. But you must read him for the sentiment and consider the story as only giving occasion to the sentiment. I have already given my opinion of Fielding, but I cannot refrain from repeating here my wonder of Johnson's excessive and unaccountable depreciation of one of the best writers the English had produced. Tom Jones has stood test of public opinion with such success as to have established its great merit, both for the story, the sentiments, and the manners, and also the various varieties of diction, so as to leave no doubt of it having an animated truth of execution throughout. But whatever. A book of travels, largely published under the title of Coryat Jr. and written by Mr. Patterson, Mr. Samuel Patterson, eminent for his knowledge of books, was mentioned. Johnson said, this book was an imitation of Sterne, to which there's a footnote here that says, Mr. Patterson in the pamphlet produced some evidence to show that his work was written before Sterne's Sentimental Journey appeared. But anyway, Johnson said, this book was an imitation of Sterne and not of Coryat, whose name Patterson had chosen as a whimsical one. Tom Coryat, said he, was a humorist about the court of James I. He had a mixture of learning, of wit, and of buffoonery. He first traveled through Europe and published his travels. He afterwards traveled on foot through Asia and had made many remarks, but he died in Mantua, and his remarks were lost. We talked of gaming, and here's a word you don't hear very much. Animadverted. On it with severity. Johnson said, nay, gentlemen, let us not aggravate the matter. It is not roguery to play with a man who is ignorant of the game, while you are master of it, and so win his money, for he thinks he can play better than you, as you think you can play better than he, and the superior skill carries it. Erskine said, he is a fool, but you are not a rogue. Johnson said, that's much about the truth, sir, and must be considered that a man who only does what every one of the society to which he belongs would do is not a dishonest man. In the Republic of Sparta it was agreed that stealing was not dishonorable if not discovered. I do not command a society where there is an agreement that what would be not otherwise be fair shall be fair. But I maintain that an individual of any society who practices what is allowed is not a dishonest man. I said, so then, sir, you do not think ill of a man who wins perhaps £40,000 in a winter? Johnson said, sir, I do not call a gamester a dishonest man, but I call him an unsocial man, an unprofitable man. Gaming is a mode of transferring property without producing any intermediate good. Trade gives employment to numbers, and so produces intermediate good. Mr. Erskine told us that when he was in the island of Minorca, he not only read prayers, but preached 2 sermons to the regiment. He seemed to object to the passage in Scripture where we are told that the angel of the Lord smote in one night 40,000 Assyrians. Sir, said Johnson, you should recollect that there was a supernatural interposition. They were destroyed by pestilence. You are not to suppose that the angel of the Lord went about and stabbed each of them with a dagger, or knocked them on the head man by man. After Mr. Erskine was gone, a discussion took place whether the present Earl of Buchan, when Lord Cardross did right to refuse to go secretary of the embassy to Spain, when Sir James Grey, a man of inferior rank, went ambassador. Dr. Johnson said that perhaps in point of interest he did wrong, but in point of dignity he did well. Sir Alexander insisted that he was wrong, and said that Mr. Pitt intended it as an advantageous thing for him. Why, sir, said Johnson, Mr. Pitt might think it an advantageous thing for him to make him a vintner, and get him all the Portugal trade, but he would have demeaned himself strangely had he accepted of such a situation. Sir, had he gone secretary while his inferior was ambassador, he would have been a traitor to his rank and family. Are you getting all this? I talked of the little attachment which subsisted between near relations in London. Sir, said Johnson, in a country so commercial as ours, where every man can do for himself, there is not so much occasion for the attachment. No man is thought the worse of here, whose brothers were hanged. In uncommercial countries, many of the branches of a family must depend on the stock. So, in order to make the head of the family take care of them, they are represented as connected with his reputation, that, self-love being interested, he may exert himself to promote their interest. You have first large circles or clans. As commerce increases, the connection is confined to families. By degrees, that too grows off, as having become unnecessary, and there being few opportunities of intercourse. One brother is a merchant in the city, and another is in office in the guards. How little intercourse can these two have? That's a good point. I argued warmly for the old feudal system. Okay. Sir Alexander opposed it and talked of the pleasure of seeing all men free and independent. Johnson said, I agree with Mr. Boswell that there must be a high satisfaction in being a feudal lord, but we are to consider that we ought not to wish to have a number of men unhappy for the satisfaction of one. I maintain that numbers, namely the vassals or followers, were not unhappy, for that there was a reciprocal satisfaction between the lord and them, he being kind in his authority over them, they being respectful and faithful to him. What could go wrong, right, Boswell? Anyway, we don't have any counter thing to that because that's the end of that day. The next day, on Thursday, April 9th, I called on Johnson to beg he would go and dine with me at the Mitford Tavern. He had resolved not to dine at all this day, I know not for what reason, and I was so unwilling to be deprived of his company that I was content to submit to suffer a want, which was at first somewhat painful, but he soon made me forget it. And a man is always pleased with himself when he finds his intellectual inclinations predominant. He observed that to reason too philosophically on the nature of prayer was very unprofitable. Talking of ghosts, he said he knew one friend who was an honest man and a sensible man, who told him he had seen a ghost, old Mr. Edward Cave, the printer of St. John's Gate. I remember him. He said Mr. Cave did not like to talk of it, and seemed to be in a great horror whenever it was mentioned. I said, Pray, sir, what did he say it was the appearance? Johnson said, Why, sir, something of a shadowy being. I mentioned witches, and asked him what they properly meant. Johnson said, Why, sir, they properly mean those who make use of the aid of evil spirits. Then I said, There is no doubt, sir, a general report and belief of their having existed. Johnson said, Sir, you have not only the general report and belief, but you have many voluntary solemn confessions. He did not affirm anything positively upon a subject which is the fashion of the times to laugh at as a matter of absurd credulity. He only seemed willing, as a candid inquirer after truth, however strange and inexplicable, to show that he understood what might be urged for it. See this curious question treated by him with more acute ability in my very own Journal of the Tour of the Hebrides, now on sale wherever good books are sold. Well, I added that in, but there is a footnote here that says that there's more about it in the Journal of the Hebrides. Anyway, Merry Christmas. That's it from Boswell for today. See you later.